Nebraska has a new U.S. senator.
111 men and women applied. 9 were granted an interview with Governor Jim Pillen.
And as 6 News' Brian Mastery reports, the new governor picked the guy he just replaced.
Pete Ricketts roamed these halls for 8 years as governor. He's been out of office just for a week. Now he's going to head to the hallways of the U.S. Capitol in Washington, D.C.
Governor Pillen and I share a lot of the same philosophies, right? We believe that government that works best works closest to the people, that it should be limited in its scope from the standpoint of what we're trying to do. It's not the solution to every problem we have, that we've got to be fiscally responsible, that we've got to do a good job of providing services.
After being the chief executive of Nebraska, Pete Ricketts will now be the junior senator from Nebraska. And because the appointment comes after the resignation of Ben Sasse, Ricketts will be last in seniority, Senator number 100. During the campaign, Governor Ricketts supported candidate Pillen for the state's highest office. State Democratic leaders today call this appointment a blatant pay-to-play scheme. Governor Pillen rejects that, saying Ricketts is simply the best Republican candidate for the job.
The question is backroom dealings, and first is anybody knows me. That's not part of my DNA. It just doesn't work. Integrity of the process and the commitment to the process was the highest priority.
Senator-designate Ricketts says he's in this for the long haul, that he'll run for the seat in 2 years. On your side in Lincoln, Brian Mastery, 6 News.
And Ben Sasse will be the next president of the University of Florida. Since he had 4 years left on his Senate term, law allows for a 2-year appointment and then requires an election where the winner serves out the last 2 years before another election.